Muy buenas tardes tengan todos ustedes. Sean bienvenidos a la ceremonia de clausura del evento conmemorativo por los 30 años de la Dirección de Internacionalización de la Universidad Anáhuac México. Soy la maestra Denise Gallegos, coordinadora de intercambios entrantes, y estaré conduciendo este evento. Para iniciar esta ceremonia, damos la más cordial bienvenida a las autoridades universitarias que hoy nos acompañan. El doctor Cipriano Sánchez García, Legionario de Cristo, rector de la Universidad Anáhuac México. La doctora Lorena Martínez Verduzco, vicerrectora académica. Y la maestra Patricia Eugenia Ruiz Ortega, directora de Internacionalización. De igual manera, damos la bienvenida a todos los directores, alumnos, egresados, docentes, socios nacionales e internacionales y público en general que nos acompañan de manera virtual a través de Zoom y de la transmisión simultánea en la cuenta de Facebook Live y YouTube de la Universidad Anáhuac México. Sean todos bienvenidos. Para iniciar, cedo la palabra a la maestra Patricia Ruiz, directora de Internacionalización, quien nos dirigirá un mensaje de bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, Denise. Buenas tardes a todos y nuevamente bienvenidos a esta celebración. Sin duda, es un gusto poder ver tantos nombres familiares conectados y poder compartir con ustedes esta tarde que nos llena de orgullo, pero que al mismo tiempo nos recuerda todo el compromiso que tenemos para llevar a realidad esta visión de internacionalización que tenemos para nuestra universidad. Aunque esta dirección tiene poco más de 3 años de existir, no podemos dejar de reconocer todo el trabajo previo que se hizo cuando hace 30 años, con apenas 27 años de existencia, se apostó por la apertura internacional de nuestra universidad y se empezó a trabajar abiertamente con el mundo. Es por ello que hoy quiero aprovechar para reconocer la labor de todas las personas que me antecedieron, tanto en el campus norte como en el campus sur, en las oficinas de vinculación e intercambio. Gracias y felicidades a todas las directores y coordinadores que sin duda lograron dar a conocer la marca Anáhuac en muchos rincones del mundo, que ahora nos reconocen y son parte de nuestra red de socios. De igual manera, extiendo un agradecimiento especial a nuestros 297 socios que a lo largo de esta historia han confiado en la marca Anáhuac y han querido construir con nosotros diversos proyectos y experiencias que han impactado a un número importante de alumnos y académicos. Por supuesto que son pieza clave para nuestra universidad y tengan la seguridad que seguiremos construyendo grandes cosas en beneficio de nuestras instituciones en los años venideros. No puedo dejar de agradecer a nuestro rector por la confianza puesta en mí para encabezar este proyecto. Muchas gracias, padre, porque es usted quien ha hecho que la internacionalización sea una línea estratégica para nuestra universidad y con el apoyo de los vicerrectores nos han ayudado a sumar a todas las escuelas, facultades y áreas en este proceso. Finalmente, quiero darme el tiempo de reconocer la labor diaria y el compromiso del equipo actual de la Dirección de Internacionalización. Areli, Denise, Edith, Ivette, Mariam, Pau, Chio y Pepe. Sin duda, todos ustedes son un ejemplo de entrega y amor por lo que hacen. Gracias por siempre dar lo mejor. Los retos que tenemos son muchos, pero sigamos dando pasos firmes. Toda mi admiración para ustedes. Si algo he aprendido en estos años dentro de la dirección es que la internacionalización es un proceso inacabable que transforma las vidas de las personas que toca. De igual manera, es un proceso que exige flexibilidad, tiempo y creatividad. Y a la vez te brinda la posibilidad de romper paradigmas al permitirte construir nuevas estrategias para enriquecer la formación de estudiantes en todas partes del mundo. Desde 1991, la internacionalización de la Universidad Anáhuac México ha ido evolucionando, adaptándose a las exigencias del mundo contemporáneo para formar a sus estudiantes como ciudadanos globales. Gracias a todos ustedes por ser parte de esta historia. Somos líderes que mueven al mundo. Bienvenidos.
Gracias, maestra Ruiz. A continuación, cedo la palabra al doctor Cipriano Sánchez García, rector de la Universidad Anáhuac México, quien nos compartirá un mensaje.
Gracias, maestra Denise. Gracias, Patricia, por tus palabras. También saludo a la vicerrectora académica aquí presente y, por supuesto, saludo muy particularmente a todo el gran equipo de nuestra Dirección de Internacionalización, que desde la sombra, a veces incluso sin poder salir muy lejos, sin embargo, hacen realidad lo que significa empujar la internacionalización desde la Anáhuac México. De veras, mil gracias a todo el equipo. Y por supuesto también quiero saludar a todos los que nos hacen el favor de estar con nosotros en esta tarde-noche en la que estamos muy contentos de poder celebrar los 30 años de la internacionalización en la Universidad Anáhuac México. 30 años de apertura, 30 años de eliminación de fronteras de nuestra universidad. Ciertamente algo que ha sido muy serio porque hemos querido mantenerlo, por lo menos en un espíritu y en una estrategia, a pesar de la pandemia mundial del COVID-19, que ciertamente al inicio a todos nos cerró puertas y sin embargo también nos abrió oportunidades de pensarnos de otra manera y de ver con otros ojos la internacionalización en la universidad. Hoy más que nunca nos damos cuenta de que una formación de excelencia, como queremos nosotros impartir desde nuestra Universidad Anáhuac México, requiere la preparación de hombres y mujeres que se identifiquen como ciudadanos globales, es decir, hombres y mujeres que no solo se circunscriban a los estrechos límites de la propia visión, sino que aprendan a abrirse a las experiencias y a las riquezas de todo lo que este mundo, hoy tan interconectado, para bien, a veces para mal, nos está ofreciendo. Por ello, la internacionalización se ha vuelto una área estratégica para nuestra comunidad universitaria, haciendo propuestas de paradigmas novedosos que traigan consigo la experiencia de la globalización y que nos motiven para también ir generando nosotros desde nuestro ambiente transformaciones sociales, políticas, económicas y culturales que puedan impactar a la educación superior. Por este mismo motivo, hoy queremos recordar con mucha alegría el camino que hemos recorrido como universidad. Cuando, como nos recordaba la maestra Patricia, hace 30 años nos abrimos al mundo firmando nuestro primer convenio de colaboración académica con la Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Éramos desconocidos en ese momento, éramos pequeños en ese momento y sin embargo agradecemos a esta universidad tan prestigiosa de España el que haya creído en la Anáhuac como un partner valioso para empujar la visión internacional. Por ello, hoy nosotros podemos decir 30 años después que la Anáhuac México ha llegado a más de 40 países, está vinculada con más de 300 instituciones educativas y sabemos que estamos tocando y transformando la vida de miles de alumnos y académicos. Los cambios tecnológicos y los cambios también de modelo educativo en este mundo laboral tan diversificado, con tanta competencia, con nuevos requerimientos de destrezas, habilidades y conocimientos, están provocando que tengamos que buscar nuevas estrategias para responder adecuadamente a todos estos retos. Y obviamente creemos firmemente que la internacionalización es una de las respuestas más acertadas para poder responder a ellos, porque esto nos permite a nosotros brindar a los estudiantes y también, ¿por qué no decirlo?, a toda la comunidad universitaria, a profesores, investigadores, directivos, a todos los que somos parte de esta familia, de esta casa común que es la Universidad Anáhuac México, las herramientas esenciales para una formación personalizada y también para una formación profesional que queremos que tenga no solo una talla internacional, también una talla de excelencia académica y una talla de excelencia humana. Por eso, para nosotros es muy importante continuar fortaleciendo acciones concretas que incidan en la formación integral de todos los que somos parte de esta comunidad y sobre todo que sepamos usar los programas y los proyectos de internacionalización dentro y fuera de nuestro campus para lograr esta formación que construye hombres y mujeres líderes de acción positiva para nuestro mundo. Creo que no podemos dejar de lado una comprensión de la internacionalización como lo que es, como un medio para lograr algo más, para lograr justamente a través de acciones como programas de estudio o proyectos de investigación conjunta o dobles diplomas o cotutelas o currículos internacionalizados, acuerdos y convenios de cooperación y colaboración, movilidad estudiantil y académica, lograr expresiones concretas del proceso formativo. Eso es lo que buscamos. No solamente buscamos que haya jóvenes de nuestra universidad en otros países, buscamos que se complementen los procesos formativos haciendo y construyendo en el corazón de estos hombres y mujeres que abren sus ventanas al mundo una visión de sí mismos que les permita entenderse como parte de una comunidad global. Ciertamente que la internacionalización tiene diversos significados, pero sobre todo queremos resaltar el de la capacidad de la respuesta que tenemos como institución para atender los retos y los fenómenos de la globalización, porque nos encontramos seriamente comprometidos con la formación integral de estos jóvenes que deseamos que sean ciertamente grandes líderes, pero sobre todo que deseamos que sean mejores personas. La conducción y el liderazgo de la Dirección de Internacionalización, a quien agradezco especialmente su trabajo y sobre todo su visión de equipo y su visión estratégica dentro de la universidad, nos ha permitido que como comunidad universitaria, junto con los directivos de nuestras 18 escuelas y facultades, se haya impulsado el desarrollo y el crecimiento de toda esta visión global dentro de nuestra universidad. De verdad, así como comencé mis palabras en este momento tan importante para nosotros, hoy también quiero felicitar a los miembros del equipo, a nuestros directores y directoras de escuela y facultad, porque a través de ellos, a través de su visión, se pueden ir construyendo las raíces de una Universidad Anáhuac cada vez más internacional y más capaz de abrirse al mundo. También saludo muy especialmente a los Orbis de cada escuela y de cada facultad y valoro muchísimo, y siempre que puedo se lo reconozco y agradezco mucho el trabajo dedicado y comprometido para que todas las actividades propias de la internacionalización se puedan desarrollar siempre con excelencia en el marco y teniendo dentro el ADN de la formación integral de nuestra comunidad universitaria. Por eso, en este día tan importante para nosotros, 30 años después de comenzar este hermoso camino, creo que solamente nos puede motivar un ideal, un compromiso, que es el de seguir siendo líderes que mueven al mundo y que, como dice el lema de nuestra universidad, estamos siempre dispuestos a vencer al mal con el bien. Muchas gracias y muchas felicidades por este precioso aniversario que hoy compartimos en nuestra universidad.
Muchas gracias, padre, por sus palabras y como bien lo dijo usted en su discurso, incluso sin poder salir en un año tan complicado y complejo como fue este año, la Dirección de Internacionalización nunca paró actividades y nos metimos de lleno en la virtualidad y en todas las herramientas que las nuevas tecnologías nos proporcionan para llevar la internacionalización a todos los rincones de la universidad, sin importar las distancias, como las técnicas COILS en las que entramos de lleno o cómo fuimos pioneros en los intercambios virtuales en México y no paramos nunca las actividades. Como pudimos ver, la Dirección de Internacionalización ha tenido un año muy especial, ya que estamos celebrando el 30º aniversario.
Parte de un mundo globalizado donde las fronteras territoriales se desdibujan.
Los invitamos a ver el siguiente video que recoge lo que han sido estos 30 años.
Se desdibujan y el trabajo intercultural es necesario para enfrentar los retos actuales. Desde la Dirección de Internacionalización de la Universidad Anáhuac México, trabajamos para formar ciudadanos globales capaces de encontrar soluciones integrales y humanas a los problemas que aquejan a nuestra sociedad y al mundo. Bajo este esquema, estamos felices de compartir que en 2021 cumplimos 30 años de abrirnos al mundo, impulsando la presencia y vinculación de nuestra universidad en el ámbito nacional e internacional en más de 40 países. La historia se remonta al primer convenio internacional que establecimos con la Universidad Complutense de Madrid y ahora contamos con más de 280 convenios con diferentes universidades de América, Europa, Asia y Oceanía. Somos parte activa de 46 consorcios de asociaciones nacionales e internacionales, de las cuales 16 son a nivel institucional y 30 de ellas están directamente relacionadas al trabajo de nuestras escuelas y facultades. Dentro de las actividades que impulsamos cada semestre se encuentran movilidad nacional, intercambio internacional, intercambio virtual, Disney Academy Program, experiencia de verano, doble diploma, prácticas en el extranjero, estancia de investigación, cotutela, campamento de idiomas, Faculty-led Programs. De nuestra conformación y hasta el día de hoy, más de 3,000 alumnos han realizado algún tipo de intercambio a nivel nacional e internacional y hemos recibido a más de 4,000 estudiantes de México y el mundo. Otros proyectos que promovemos para aproximar a nuestra comunidad al entorno global son los Collaborative Online International Learning, COE, una metodología innovadora en la que los alumnos y profesores de distintas universidades colaboran de manera virtual, creándose un ambiente intercultural y multidisciplinario dentro de la clase. Hemos implementado estrategias de internacionalización en casa, como el proyecto de internacionalización de las asignaturas, eventos internacionales dentro del campus, profesores e investigadores visitantes, clases de inglés, alumnos extranjeros visitantes, entre otros. Con más de 30 años de historia, seguimos promoviendo la formación de líderes globales comprometidos con su entorno en pro de un mundo mejor. Líderes que mueven al mundo. Somos Anáhuac, líderes de acción positiva.
Como pudimos ver, han sido 30 años de grandes retos y logros para consolidar lo que hoy es la Dirección de Internacionalización de la Universidad Anáhuac México, en la que han contribuido una gran cantidad de personas, desde autoridades universitarias, directores, coordinadores académicos y administrativos, profesores, socios nacionales e internacionales y todos nuestros estudiantes. Para continuar con nuestro evento, damos la bienvenida a nuestra invitada de esta tarde, la doctora Darla Dierdorf, quien nos hablará sobre la importancia de la necesidad de la competencia intercultural en el futuro post-pandemia. Antes de cederle la palabra, me permito leer su semblanza. Dr. Darla Dierdorf is Executive Director of the Association of International Education Administrators, a leadership organization. She is also a research fellow at Duke University. She has worked in the international education field for over 25 years and previously held positions at North Carolina State University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where she has had experience in study abroad, international student services, cultural programming, and ESL teaching teacher training. Founder of ICC Global, a global research network on intercultural competence, as well as the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence, she has lived, taught, and worked in Germany, Japan, and Switzerland. In addition, she has had 2 Fulbrights, one to South Africa and one to Japan. Dr. Dierdorf's faculty experience includes Harvard University's Future of Learning Institute, Harvard's Global Education Think Tank, the Summer Institute of Intercultural Communication, Shanghai International Studies University in China, Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and Meiji University in Japan, as well as Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Regularly invited to speak around the world, Dr. Dierdorf consultants for universities, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. Recent projects include advising the OICDE's PISA Global Competence Project and UNESCO Intercultural Competence Project. She has published widely, including over 60 articles and books chapters, as well as 10 books starting with the SAGE, a Handbook of Intercultural Competence. Other books include lead editor of the SAGE Handbook of International Higher Education, co-author of Building Cultural Competence, author of Demystifying Outcomes Assessment for International Educators, co-editor of Intercultural Competence in Higher Education, and lead editor of Leading Internationalization. Her latest book is Manual for Developing Intercultural Competencies, Story Circles, which is open access in 5 languages. She is currently working on 2 more books. Welcome, Dr. Dierdorf.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes desde Carolina del Norte. Hablo solamente un poquito en español, entonces inglés es mejor. I'm so sorry. Lo siento that I cannot speak more in español. But I want to thank you so much for the kind invitation to be here with you for this special celebration. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction just now. And I want to say felicidades, congratulations on the 30th anniversary of the Office of Internationalization at Universidad Anáhuac. That is really quite an accomplishment, and I want to congratulate the director, Patricia Ruiz, and all of the colleagues, the president. Congratulations on this amazing and very special occasion. So I am happy to share with you today a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing around intercultural competence. And I want to take some time now to share with you about the imperative of intercultural competence in a post-pandemic future. So during our time together, I want to start with the why this is so important that we really think about and address intercultural competence in higher education. Then I want to spend some time talking about the what is intercultural competence, and I'll share with you some different terminology and a framework around this. And then the rest of the time, I want to talk with you about how we can think about developing intercultural competence within the higher education context. So that's where I am hoping we can talk and discuss today together. So to start with the why, it's important to acknowledge where we are right now and that the entire world has been so immensely impacted by the COVID pandemic. And of course, many other really crucial issues as well. And I think that the COVID pandemic illustrates very well why intercultural competence is so needed and so important. It's because scientists from different cultures and different nations and backgrounds were able to work together, that they were able to develop a vaccine so quickly. And I think that really speaks to scientists' intercultural competence about how they were able to come together to develop the vaccines so quickly. At the same time, I think that the messaging around the vaccines, particularly in my country, in the United States, but perhaps in other countries as well, the messaging was not as interculturally competent as it could be. Because if it had been more interculturally competent, maybe we would have a higher vaccination rate, right? So that kind of speaks to, yes, it works really well with the vaccine, but we need more intercultural competence even around the messaging of that vaccine. And again, there's so many other crucial issues that humans on this planet are facing. And I would say it's not just the COVID pandemic, but in many ways, at least in my country, there's also been a pandemic of hate. The increasing divides in society. And it really is important then for higher education institutions to address the urgent need for intercultural competence in order to begin to bridge these great divides, the racism, the discrimination, and yes, even the hatred that we find in our societies. And it's through intercultural competence, through building bridges with those who are not like us, for embracing our neighbors who are not like us. That is intercultural competence. And it's so urgent now more than ever that we address and figure out how do we get along together and how can we address intercultural competence within higher education. Intercultural competence is also greatly needed in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals put forth from the United Nations. Specifically, you'll see goal number 4 and 16 are directly impacted by intercultural competence, the quality education, particularly around global citizenship, but then also 16, Sustainable Development 16, in terms of peace and justice and how important the intercultural competence plays in building a more peaceful world. And yet you will find that throughout all 17, intercultural competence is needed as we work together to achieve these goals. And specifically, we can find that intercultural competence is a driver for sustainable goals such as number 5, gender equality, 8 and 9 that have to do with the economy and jobs, and even 10 in terms of inequalities and how we can reduce inequalities in our societies. So intercultural competence really is foundational and fundamental to even achieving these very broad and crucial goals of the Sustainable Development goals laid out from the United Nations. So what do we mean with intercultural competence? So even in English, and I'm sure in Spanish too, there are many different terms used to describe this concept. And you see the list here. I will not talk through all of those, but just to know that even in English, there are so many different words that are used, over 30 different terms. And a lot depends, of course, on the discipline, on the context. So you can see here, for example, in communication, that discipline of communication often uses the term intercultural communicative competence. If you look through the rest here, social work and healthcare talk about cultural competence. Engineering and business talk about global competence. Yet business also uses cultural intelligence, and there's a whole body of literature and work around cultural intelligence. And in education, there are many different terms used, including global citizenship, global learning, and so on. So it depends on the discipline, and it's important to know that there are just many different terms used. So the question becomes, regardless of the term, of the words used, what do we mean? What is intercultural competence? And if we were together, I would love to hear your responses to this question. What is intercultural competence? Or another way to think about this is, what is necessary for us to get along together as humans? What is necessary? What is needed for us to be able to get along together as humans sharing this planet, and in addressing those key global challenges that you saw from the United Nations? So this question has become the burning question for me to study for over the last decade. And some of this work has resulted in one of the first research-based frameworks and definitions around intercultural competence. And this is the results of some of my studies. This is one of the first research-based frameworks that you see here. And I want to talk with you through some of the different components of intercultural competence, because as you see, it's not an easy answer, not a quick answer to what is intercultural competence. So it starts with attitudes. And from the research I did with experts, with leading experts in the field, that we find that there are 3 key attitudes: that of respect, of being able to value the other person as a fellow human being, of openness, open-mindedness, and then of curiosity and discovery, of wanting to learn more about others. These 3 attitudes are absolutely essential for the development of intercultural competence. Then we come to knowledge, and there are some really important knowledge areas, including cultural self-awareness, of being aware of the lens through which we see the world. Each of us has a culturally conditioned lens through which we see the world. It's also about culture-specific information, sociolinguistic awareness, and a deeper understanding around culture, including the history, the economics, all that involved with the culture, and then with worldviews and understanding how others see the world. And in fact, this is the only aspect that the experts in my study agreed on as being absolutely essential to intercultural competence, and that is being able to see the world from others' perspectives. And yet that's so difficult to do, because we are always seeing the world through, again, our own culturally conditioned lens. So with the knowledge, then we come to skills. And that becomes a basic definition of competence, knowledge, skills, and attitude. And these skills that are essential to intercultural competence development include very basic skills, listening, and not just any kind of listening, but listening for understanding, which requires a much deeper kind of listening where we really focus on the person speaking and we seek first to understand. Seeking first to understand is very important. It's also about observing, about understanding, interpreting, evaluating, relating the information, and then moving forward into what we see as a desired internal outcome, which means that with the knowledge and the skills and attitudes I just talked about, we hopefully become more adaptable, more flexible, that in the end, we even develop more empathy, especially to those who are not like us. And then that leads to this external outcome. And this is what we experience in our interactions with others. And if you want a short definition of intercultural competence, it could be here. This is a summary definition, if you will. That intercultural competence is about behavior and communication that is both effective and appropriate across difference. And the two words here, effective and appropriate, are very important because a lot of the intercultural literature talks about effectiveness, particularly in the business world, in the business literature, we'll talk about effectiveness, but that is really only half of the picture. The other half is appropriateness. Were we appropriate in our interactions? And that's where intercultural competence becomes a bit more challenging because the effectiveness has to do with how we reach our own goals. But it's the way in which we achieve our goals that intercultural competence comes into play, and were we appropriate in achieving those goals in our interactions. And it's really only the other people who can determine whether we are appropriate or not within that context. So those are the components of intercultural competence from this research-based model. And I show it to you again. The elements I just talked to you about are put into two different frameworks here. The one looks like a pyramid, but with any model, there are limitations. And the limitation of the pyramid model is that it kind of implies that there's a point at which we become interculturally competent. So that wasn't really quite captured in reality, and it's difficult for any model or framework to really capture reality. And so the research was actually showing that intercultural competence is a lifelong process. So that's where you see the process model, that there's no point at which any of us can say, okay, I'm interculturally competent. No, because every day we can learn something new. We can always improve our intercultural competence every day. And so this is where the process model is showing that we are all on an intercultural journey throughout our lives. And that has real implications for education. And we'll talk some more about that in just a moment. If you want to download those models, you can find them online at the NAFSA website. You see that here, and they are also can be found in numerous publications, as you heard, including there's a whole handbook on intercultural competence where you can find a lot more information on this and other models. So as I mentioned, there are limitations with any research or framework. And one of those is, of course, in this case, most of the research reflects a global north perspective and is quite US-centric because many of the experts involved were based in the United States. Not all of them, but many of them. And yet, it's been interesting to continue to work on this research. The update is that whereas intercultural competence initially meant looking at cross-border interactions across countries, The definition now is more about looking at how we interact across difference, whatever that difference may be, including within our societies. And that could be differences between generations, like older people, younger people, different genders, different religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, even differences between rural and urban residencies. So there's many different ways in which we can look at how intercultural competence is relevant in so many different contexts, even within our own country and our own communities. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the one element that all the experts agreed on 100% as being absolutely essential to intercultural competence is being able to see from others' perspectives. And so that has become a burning question for me, which, as you heard, has led me to have Fulbrights in South Africa and in Japan, and looking to understand intercultural competence from other perspectives. It also has led me to really ask this question, intercultural competence according to whom? According to whom? It's a very important question. Particularly as we think about whose knowledge is being privileged and whose voices matter. And so this led to some work with the United Nations and a publication that I and some others from around the world worked on. You can find this publication online and you can download this. We were looking at regional perspectives around the world of intercultural competence, and some key themes emerged, which you see here, around the importance of respect and listening, relationship building, the multiple perspectives, and also cultural humility. And cultural humility here means the recognition that the way in which we see the world is only one way. We acknowledge that, and we understand that there are many other ways to see the world. And so then we seek out those multiple perspectives. So those are some of the key themes that emerged at the global level. And that has also led to some other work I've been doing at the global level. You heard about the OECD work, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I was one of 4 experts who worked on the PISA Global Competence, the Program in International Student Assessment that was given to 15-year-olds around the world. You see the model of global competence here on the slide. Let me go back. That was developed for the purposes of PISA. It also has led me to continue to work with UNESCO, and we have developed an intercultural methodology specifically for practicing intercultural competencies. And as you heard, this is available through an open access manual in 5 languages. So it's also in Espanol. And so you can download this for free. I have used this a lot at the university. I would encourage you to use this. I use it in courses that I teach. We use it at orientation. We have used it in COIL courses. I heard the COIL courses mentioned earlier. So there are many different ways that this can be used, both virtually as well as in person. The picture you see there of story circles is one that we did in South Africa pre-pandemic. And then Council of Europe has done a lot of work around intercultural competencies, particularly as they see competencies as necessary for democracy to be able to survive and succeed and thrive. And so there are some different resources from the Council of Europe that you can also download and access. And all of this, including that PISA Global Competence, is also available online. So that's at the kind of big picture, global level. Still very important at the global level to be addressing intercultural and global competence. I should also mention that there's a new nonprofit called the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence, with researchers and practitioners and students and policymakers from all over the world. And I'm very involved with the World Council. I invite all of you to join. They have working groups that you can be part of, including a working group in Espanol. And so if you're interested more in intercultural competence, please do join the World Council. You can find more details at www.iccglobal.org. So now we come to looking at intercultural competence in higher education and in education. And here is an updated definition around internationalization. What does internationalization of education mean? And this takes as a starting point Jane Knight's definition from 2004, and then Hans de Witt and colleagues added onto that the underlined words. And so when we talk about the internationalization of education, and as well, the Office of Internationalization there knows, the colleagues there, it's the intentional process of integrating an international, intercultural, that's where the word comes in, or global dimension into pretty much all facets of the university, right? The purpose, functions, and delivery of post-secondary education. In order to, like, why do we do this? Back to the why, in order to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. So with that definition, then let me take us further into looking at a survey. I want to have us briefly look at a survey that was done recently in 2019 from the International Association of Universities, in which they were looking at internationalization. And specifically with this survey, what fascinated me was that they found that the two main intercultural methods that are being used at universities around the world have to do with developing students' international perspectives and focusing on faculty professional development, academics professional development, and particularly how they can integrate intercultural competence into teaching, regardless of the course or the discipline. In terms of internationalization of the curriculum, and this is really where all students can be impacted, that internationalization of the curriculum was found to be one of the most important priorities of internationalization, except in North America, unfortunately. But around the world, this was generally considered to be one of the top priorities. In terms of looking at institutional-wide learning outcomes related to international and global competencies, the highest percentage were found at institutions in Asia Pacific and the Middle East. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. And finally, as you see here from the slide here, that when we look at extracurricular activities outside of the classroom, outside of the curriculum, what we see is that there are some key programs such as buddy mentor programs, intercultural skill building workshops for students and staff, and even experiences in the local community that help to develop intercultural competence. So this is from the survey. Now, what are the implications of all this? As we understand this more, the implications for higher education for us. First of all, it's important that we go beyond mobility, beyond study abroad. And of course, we've had to do so with the pandemic because our students simply can't engage in physical exchange the way they used to before the pandemic. I have heard some university leaders in my country say that if we would just send students abroad, they could come back interculturally competent. And of course, the research shows this is unfortunately not true, that it's not enough to just send students out of our countries to other countries. In fact, sometimes that can even lead to more ethnocentrism and kind of the opposite of intercultural competence development. So we have to not just rely on the physical mobility, as we now know from the pandemic. We also need to go beyond the curriculum. So the curriculum becomes really important for impacting all students, but we have to understand that students' experiences also extend outside of the classes. And so we need to ask, what are we doing to help develop students' intercultural competence through the experiences that they have informally with programs and experiences that they have outside of the classes that they take at our universities. So it's important to consider that and to really think about, how do we impact all students and even everyone at the university, including students and staff, when it comes to developing intercultural competence. We also need to understand that intercultural competence goes beyond knowledge. As you already saw from the framework, knowledge was one part, but it was just one part. And so we need to ask ourselves, how are we developing skills, attitudes in our students, staff, and faculty? And language alone is not enough. Language alone is not sufficient for intercultural competence. In fact, the experts in my study could not reach consensus on the role of language, because they said they knew a case of too many fluent fools who maybe knew the vocabulary or the grammar of a language, but that they were interculturally incompetent in navigating within society and within relationships. Also, we need to look at, how do we go beyond results? Oftentimes, universities are quite focused on numbers and on results. But given that intercultural competence is a lifelong process, we need to focus more on the process. We need to understand that students are only with us for a few years out of their entire life, and that they will continue to develop intercultural competence for a lifetime. We also need to understand that sometimes students are further along in their intercultural journey than even the staff and professors. So that's an important piece to understand as well. We need to go beyond using only pre and post assessments. And this could be another whole topic that we could talk about, is how do we assess intercultural competence? And as you heard, I actually wrote a whole book about assessing intercultural competence. There's a lot there to think about and know in terms of assessment. And along with that, we need to understand that we have to go beyond a one-size-fits-all, whether it's for developing intercultural competence or assessing intercultural competence. That students, all of us, we are at different places in the journey, in the intercultural journey, and we need to tailor our efforts more for where students are and to meet them where they are. So what does this all mean? What does this all mean? Well, let me propose to you that what this means is that we need to really look holistically at a whole school approach to intercultural competence development. That it starts with the leadership at the top in the university. It extends to students and teachers, to the professors. It even is important to look at the infrastructure, the facilities, the overall climate. What is the climate or environment at our institution? And is it welcoming and inclusive and open to all? We need to have a closer look at our policies and our practices, again, to look at how interculturally competent are those practices and policies, how open and inclusive. We need to pay a lot of attention to the teaching that occurs. And there's a lot that we can consider around teaching and instruction. And is it done in such a way that meets the needs of all students? Our students are so diverse. And so we can ask, are a particular group of students privileged more than another through the instruction that is done? The same can be asked about the curriculum. When we look at the curriculum, and this is in all courses, not just language courses, for example, but when we look at the curriculum at the institution, we need to ask whose voices are missing, whose knowledge is being privileged. It's really important to pay attention to the different perspectives represented in the curriculum, the materials that are used. There's so much that we can look at just within the curriculum itself. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we need to pay attention to the co-curriculum, to the programs, the experiences the students have outside of the classes. And then finally, we need to have a look at the local community around the institution, both the campus community itself and then the community around the institution, to look for opportunities to continue to engage with those who are different from us and to develop these key intercultural competencies. So it's really this whole school approach so that this addresses and impacts everyone, all stakeholders at our institution, not just even the students. So to go a little bit deeper around what this whole school approach looks like, I want to just put forth some questions for you to think about in your context. So broadly, thinking about intercultural competence, are we clear on why intercultural competence needs to be addressed? It's important to start with the why, a little bit like where we started today with why we need intercultural competence. And to ask ourselves, intercultural competence, to what end? Why? It's so important to be clear on that. And then to understand, how does intercultural competence fit with the school mission, with the overall mission statement of the institution? Where is intercultural competence in that? How does it fit? And then with the terms, you saw many different terms that can be used. What do we mean when we are using terms like global citizen or global competence? And what are our definitions based on? Are those definitions we've just created? Or are they based on over 60 years worth of scholarly work that's been done on these concepts? It's also good to consider and look at the assumptions that we are making about intercultural competence in the programs and the courses throughout the institution, within the courses and even the co-curricular programming. Are the intercultural learning goals clear? Do they even exist? Do we have intercultural goals? And then if so, then what are the outcomes, the specific measurable outcomes? For example, is it about helping students see from different perspectives on a particular issue? So it's really important then to look at where is intercultural competence being intentionally addressed throughout the institution in all the different aspects that I listed on the previous slide. And to begin to identify the leaders and champions of intercultural competence within the institution. That's a really excellent starting point. To say, who are the leaders and champions? And start with that and then build out from there. So those are some really broad questions to look at. And then when we go more specifically into the curriculum, as I mentioned, these are some questions that are important for professors to explore further about perspectives and knowledge, the implicit messages that are being conveyed. This is often called the hidden curriculum, and to be aware of what is the hidden curriculum through what is being taught and how it is being taught. So then that leads to some pathways to intercultural development within the institution. And this is kind of a way of a summary to think about. Research has shown that the curriculum, first and foremost, is a key pathway to developing intercultural competence. In fact, the PISA Global Competence Test that was given to 15-year-olds around the world confirmed that intercultural competence can indeed be taught. And it matters by how intentional intercultural global competence is being addressed within the curriculum through the activities that are used. It has to go beyond lecture. It needs to involve experiential learning, We need to really pay close attention to the materials that are being used. And this is where technology plays a key role. And again, I heard the COIL mentioned earlier. This is where COIL the collaborative online international learning, the virtual exchange, it can become a very important tool for the curriculum in bringing students from different cultures, different backgrounds together to work together on a project, to learn from each other. And then as they do that virtually, they can indeed practice and develop intercultural competencies. I will note that this COIL, the virtual exchange, is not a substitute for physical mobility. That's something entirely different, right? That the COIL courses really are more of a tool for use in the curriculum. So institutions are strongly encouraged to focus first and foremost on the curriculum and to look at how intercultural competence is being addressed throughout all courses. And let me give you an example of this. There's an institution, a university here in the United States that I was working with. And the top leadership, the president, told the faculty it's important to include intercultural competence in all of the courses. And he said he wanted the faculty to develop specific learning outcomes related to intercultural competence. That was the task he gave the faculty, the academics. So they spent several months developing a long list of intercultural learning outcomes. And they came back to the president with about 50 learning outcomes. And at that point, he said, "This is great work. Thank you so much. Now I need all of you, all the faculty at this institution, to agree on the top 5 learning outcomes. What are the top 5 out of this list?" So they went back to work several more months, and they eventually agreed on the top 5 learning outcomes related to intercultural competence development. They came back to the president and presented their top 5, and he said, "Thank you very much. This is wonderful work. Now, every single professor at this institution needs to include at least 2 of these 5 learning outcomes in every single course that is taught at this institution, whether that is a chemistry course or a music course or a history course. No matter what kind of course it is, you need to include 2 of these 5 intercultural learning outcomes." And that is how one institution, one university, incorporated very intentionally these intercultural learning outcomes into all of the courses at their university. So that's one example. We also need to really look at student programs as a pathway to intercultural development and to understand what opportunities do students have to interact in very meaningful ways with people who are not like them, with students who are not like them. And so it's important and even imperative to pay attention to these programs and be very intentional about what we hope students will achieve through the student programs at our institution outside of the classes. And then we turn our attention to the staff. And here it's really important to look at what are we doing to support staff development of intercultural competence, and not just to come to a one-time workshop, but really more as a multi-phase training over time. And another example I can give you is that one university set up a certificate program for staff. And it was a certificate of completion, not that it was certifying that they were interculturally competent, but it involved staff committing to attending 6 different sessions throughout a semester. And so it took place, again, beyond just one workshop, but over 6 different times in the semester, they would come together and work on various aspects of intercultural competence through speakers or videos or simulation. And then at the end, they were able to receive a certificate of completion. So more of a longer term program is very important in terms of supporting staff who work with students and others on campus. So that becomes another important pathway to intercultural competence development. Next, we can turn our attention to the academics, to the faculty, the professors. And here it's important to understand that we need to meet the academics where they are. And so that means instead of a training workshop, what might work better is to engage academics and professors in discussions, in working groups. And one example I can give you is at a university, faculty from many different disciplines were invited to join a working group. This working group would read academic articles on intercultural competence. The faculty group would meet to discuss these articles together. And then the following semester, they invited the authors of those articles to come for a symposium. And so then the faculty could meet those authors and work directly together. That seemed to work really well in connecting with the professors or academics at the institution. And then, of course, education abroad has been identified in the research as a pathway to intercultural competence development. But again, it's important to really pay attention to how the program is set up, how students are prepared before they go, how they are supported while they are in country, and how students are supported when they come back to the home campus. And research has shown certainly that really intentional work with students interculturally before, during, and after the education abroad experience is what makes the most difference. It's important to integrate assessment, intercultural assessment into it, and when possible, to support students through intercultural coaching. And we're seeing that as an increasing way in which students are being supported. So these are intentional pathways to developing intercultural competence. Now I'd like to just change a little bit to looking at what are some of the trends that we're seeing in a post-pandemic future in regard to intercultural competence. So as you can see here, we're seeing 6 emerging trends. The first includes a focus much more on holistic learner development. So not focusing, for example, exclusively on the intercultural component, but looking at how it's integrated holistically with moral development, with leadership development, and also with social emotional learning. But there's a lot more now about the social emotional learning and how it's connected to intercultural development and holistic learning. We're also seeing an increased use of peer learning and assessment. In fact, I've been involved with the OECD Education 2030 efforts, and it's really been a lot of focus on peer learning, on students taking charge of their own learning, so that it's not so much the top-down teacher telling students what to do, but it's much more of a partnership between teachers and students, and then partnership between peers, student to student, so that they can really learn from each other. And so this is becoming very important in education in general, but also when it comes to intercultural competence development. Because as I've mentioned, in some cases, students are much further along in their intercultural journey even than the professors. And so they might be better able to support and help each other as partners. I mentioned the increased use of coaching, intercultural coaching, in helping students, even with the story circles that we use at UNESCO with the United Nations. There's a component that can be used where participants develop action plans after participating in story circles, and then they could meet with someone who would help coach them kind of on the next steps in their action plan to develop more interculturally. Throughout all of this, we're seeing that it's really important to make a long-term commitment, that this should not just be a quick course or workshop that's added in, but it's really about looking at how the institution itself can commit in the long term to developing intercultural competence for all stakeholders at the institution, not just the students. And then in doing so, how do we connect intercultural competence to real world issues? So not just keeping it in a classroom, not just keeping it on campus, but what about those real world issues, kind of where we started today with, in terms of the sustainable development goals, in terms of these challenges that face all of us as humans. How are we connecting intercultural competence to these bigger challenges? So those are some of the trends that we are seeing as we move into a post-pandemic future. Here are some strategies to think about, perhaps to look at how you could foster these at your institution. To start with challenging assumptions and the status quo, the way things are done. To engage all stakeholders, especially our students. How are we engaging our students as stakeholders? How are we partnering with our students? And really then begin mapping intercultural competence. Where is it? Where does it happen at our institution? Is it only in the curriculum? What about all the other areas of that whole school approach that we talked about? Where is intercultural competence happening? Again, involving the students as partners becomes really important. Focusing on the academics is an area of research that has shown to be very effective, that we really need to support our professors in their understanding around intercultural competence. It's important to deconstruct policies and practices to make sure that they are interculturally competent and they're not privileging one group over another. Looking at how to embed intercultural competence throughout the institution with the whole school approach, while staying true to underlying values. And that means also embracing a growth mindset. And this is a conversation that I see at the global level as well, in terms of, again, the work with the OECD, the importance of a growth mindset, of continuing to go toward that which we don't know. And that's so powerful when it comes to intercultural development as well. And then again, the conversation has been, particularly at the global level, largely around looking at this as a lifelong learning opportunity, not just intercultural competence development, but higher education as a whole. We need to look at it as much more than just working with undergraduates for a short period of time. But it's about how do we develop these skills and competencies over a lifetime. And that could mean within our institution. So I want to kind of circle back then to this whole school approach and to really think holistically about integrating intercultural competence into all facets of the institution. And that is our challenge. That is our challenge. Think about how can we integrate intercultural competence into all facets of the institution so that this impacts all. So in terms of the way forward, what's next? Where do we go from here? Well, I would say first to start with mapping. Mapping has been a very helpful exercise for many institutions. So if that's not happened at Anáhuac, that might be a good starting point to say, where is intercultural competence happening within all those different facets and layers of the institution? And let's start with that, to really look at how to support the faculty and professors with intercultural competence development, partnering with our students. It's amazing what can happen when we partner with our students. And then together, imagine what can be possible in a post-pandemic future in regard to intercultural competence. There's so much potential. And it just starts with bringing folks together, bringing students together, academics working together to see what is possible. So for each of you listening now, I want to encourage you to step back and reflect for just a few moments. What is one takeaway from our time together just now? I know I've shared a lot with you. So if there's just one thing that you want to remember, one takeaway, what would that be? So think for a moment. And then what is one action step that you will commit to in advancing intercultural competence in your context as we move forward into a post-pandemic future? What is one action step that you will commit to? So in closing, I want to kind of come big picture, full circle again to where we started with why this is so important to address intercultural competence. And this is a quote that I want to share with you from Martin Luther King Jr. And it's a quote that has inspired me in all of this work around intercultural competence. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must learn to live together." It's not an option, and it's something we have to learn. We must learn to live together as brothers, as family, or perish together as fools. And I think the current times in which we're living with the COVID pandemic, with the pandemic of hatred, has really shown us now more than ever how absolutely crucial intercultural competence is to our future together as family sharing this planet. Thank you so much to each of you for all the work you are doing to build a better world. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you on this very special occasion of the 30th anniversary. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I encourage you, please, to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. I'm on LinkedIn. Here's my email address. And also, you'll see several opportunities listed on this slide. As you heard, I work with the Association of International Education Administrators. We're having both a virtual and hopefully in-person conference in 2022. The in-person portion would be in New Orleans if we are able to meet. And you can find details on the website that's listed there, as well as details about a leadership academy for international education leaders that is organized by the AIEA. Again, I want to invite all of you who are interested in intercultural and global competence to join in the working groups at the World Council, this global network, and you'll see the website listed there. And then I included the link to the open access Story Circles book if you would like to download that. And if any of you use Story Circles, I would love to hear from you and to hear about your experience in using Story Circles. And also, I should mention, World Council is having an information session next week about Story Circles if you want to learn more about that as well. So again, hearty congratulations on the 30th anniversary, and thank you again so much for your time, for your kind invitation to be with you and be part of the special celebration. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Darla. Now we have a few. Thank you very much, Dr. Darla, for being with us in this anniversary. We are very glad to receive you. We are glad to hear your message, your important message, and all this information you shared with us this evening. I think we are like with so much to think and to do here in our university and in the Mexico universities. Well, we have some questions from people in the session. So I don't know if my colleagues want to start reading the questions.
Yes, Denise, thank you so much. Dr. Darla, the first question is from an attendee in Facebook. And the question is, how can we get on board and convince professors and of all the disciplines that taking time for intercultural competence is a win-win?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much. Yes, I know. I've talked with professors who sometimes will say, oh, that's an extra. I don't have time for that. But basically, if students are going to be working with other human beings in the future, it's absolutely essential to address this. And I am really happy to see that particularly professors in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, math, they see the relevance. I know a number of different tech courses where the professors are addressing intercultural competence as part of the tech courses. And if professors themselves don't see the relevance, then sometimes there can be other leverage points. So for example, there are a number of different disciplines, and I would say at least in my country, where the accreditation bodies require intercultural global competence to be addressed. Specifically, ABET for engineering, in business, social work, health sciences, education. All of those have some aspect required in the accreditation process around intercultural global competence. So sometimes it's about finding other leverage points if the individual professors themselves don't see the relevance of doing so.
Thank you so much, Dr. Darla. The next question is from an attendee in YouTube, and is that considering that studying abroad is not possible for all the students, is it possible to develop the intercultural competence without any education abroad?
Yes, in fact, research has shown that it's not necessary to go abroad to develop intercultural competence. And furthermore, a lot depends on the type of education abroad experience as to whether it even develops intercultural competence in students at all. What is most important, and this is based on research, is to have institutions engage in what's called high impact practices. And those include experiential learning. So again, not just staying in the four walls of a classroom, but engaging in experiential learning, including service learning. And service learning is about volunteering in the community, in the local community, and then bringing that learning back into the classroom. One other example I will give is that in some of the intercultural courses that I have taught, I require that the students participate in a cultural immersion experience in the local community. And some of the students really struggle with, what do you mean by this? and they say, well, could I go to the international festival at the university? I say, no, that's not a cultural immersion experience. It needs to be an experience intended for a group other than the ones you belong to. And so here in the United States, for example, here in the town where I live in Durham, North Carolina, there is a market that persons can go to. And when you're at that market, it almost feels like you're in Mexico because everything is in Spanish. And it's an amazing experience. And I'm so grateful to have been able to have been in Mexico numerous times and in Mexico City. And so when I am missing being in Mexico, I go to this market. And so that's one place where students might go to have a cultural immersion experience. And there are other examples of where they can go in the local community to be with a group, not their own. I was teaching a course online several years ago, and in the mountains of North Carolina, it's quite rural. So there's not as much diversity there. I had a teacher who was part of the online course, and she decided to go to a concert, a music concert that was largely attended by those who were African American, and she was not African American. And she had the most amazing experience and learned so much. And her students who were there were found it just incredibly supportive that she would come and be part of that. So there are lots of examples that persons can have cultural immersion experiences, developing their intercultural competence locally in their own communities. And I've had some students say they had no idea they could have those kinds of experiences without getting on an airplane and leaving the country. And it is possible because too often we just hang out with people who look like us and talk like us and think like we do. But we need to push our comfort zones right where we are, to go outside of our comfort zones right here in our own backyards, in our own communities. And in that way, we can develop intercultural competence as we work with and learn from people who are not like us. Thank you so much for your question. There's a lot more we could say about that.
Thank you, Dr. Darla. We will have one more question from our assistant.
Thank you. The last question is it possible that one day we get rid of the word racism?
Okay, yeah, so thank you so much for that question. And kind of like what we're talking about with the different terms that are used for intercultural competence, so much depends on context. And in some contexts, yes, I think it is possible to get rid of the word racism. In fact, when I was in South Africa, they were even talking about a post-racism future. Now, of course, there's a long ways to go. There's a lot of hard work that has to be done there, but they were hopeful in trying to talk about that. In the United States, it's such the context of race in the U.S. is so crucial to even the history of the U.S. that it might be difficult to get rid of that word. So much depends on the context and looking at all the complexities around the terms that we use, whether it's racism or even the complexities around the terms that we use related to intercultural competence. What is important, regardless of the terms, is that we really work toward embracing our shared humanity. We need to, everything we do, all of our efforts, to work toward understanding what does it mean to embrace our shared common humanity together and trying then to build a more peaceful world. Thank you so much to all of you. Muchas gracias. Please do keep in touch. And again, hearty congratulations on the 30th anniversary.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darla, for your time. We want to recognize you for being with us this evening. We will give you a recognition and we will send it to you by email. Muchas gracias, doctora Darla Derdorf, por su conferencia magistral. De parte de nuestra universidad, le estaremos haciendo llegar el reconocimiento correspondiente. I invite everyone assisting to this conference to contact Dr. Darla, to question and to think and to read all the great books she shared with us. This is a very important topic we have to start doing in our universities and to start rethinking the way we do internationalization. Pasamos a la fase final de nuestro evento. A continuación, tendremos la premiación de los 3 ganadores del concurso de ensayo por los 30 años de internacionalización. Agradeciendo de manera particular a Syscard por patrocinar dichos premios. Por ello, agradecemos la presencia de Gerardo Ángelo García, ejecutivo de cuenta de segmento estudiantil de Syscard, quien nos acompaña esta noche. A continuación, nombraré a las ganadoras del concurso de ensayo en orden del tercero al primer lugar. Obteniendo el tercer lugar, la alumna Lisbeth Ailín Hurtado Carrillo, de la maestría en estadística, con el nombre de ensayo Rompiendo Barreras, la interculturalidad virtual como incentivo para la adaptación durante la pandemia de COVID-19. Felicidades, Lisbeth, por tu esfuerzo y por tu tercer lugar. De manera virtual nos acompaña también nuestro segundo lugar, quien es la alumna Gabriela Esquivel Rábago. Ella es alumna de la licenciatura en Ciencias Actuariales y participó con el ensayo Internacionalización, Fuerza y Unión a nivel mundial. Te agradecemos muchísimo tu participación, Gabriela. Te estamos guardando tu reconocimiento y mientras también se puede ver en pantalla. Y ahora damos paso a presentar a nuestro primer lugar en el concurso de ensayo. Ella es Jocelyn Villafaña de la Rosa, de la maestría en bioética, con el ensayo Importancia de la interculturalidad desde la experiencia de los intercambios virtuales. Felicidades y gracias por acompañarnos, Jocelyn. Nuevamente, muchas felicidades a nuestras 3 ganadoras. Ahora sí, hemos llegado al cierre de nuestro evento, conmemorando el 30º aniversario de la Dirección de Internacionalización de la Universidad Anáhuac México. Antes de despedirnos, cedo la palabra a nuestra vicerrectora académica, la doctora Lorena Martínez Verduzco.
Pues buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos hasta el final y gracias por disfrutar junto con nosotros de este evento y de esta plática tan enriquecedora de la doctora Dierdorf. Antes de despedirme de ustedes, quisiera pues mostrar mi reconocimiento al equipo de internacionalización, a la maestra Patricia Ruiz y a todo su equipo, a Denise, a Ivette, a Lau, a Chío, a Pepe, no sé quién está por allá, pero de verdad gracias por tanto trabajo, porque como bien decía el padre al principio, pues a veces este equipo no lo vemos, pero es el que de verdad logra que podamos completar este proceso de internacionalización. Gracias también a los directores de escuela y de facultad por su compromiso con la internacionalización en la universidad. Gracias a nuestros Orbis, gracias a los padres de familia que acompañan a sus alumnos en este proceso de internacionalización. Y pues muchas felicidades a la Dirección de Internacionalización, felicidades por este logro de los primeros 30 años, gracias por tanto trabajo y por tanto esfuerzo. Y pues al tiempo de dar este agradecimiento y esta felicitación, quisiera de verdad que tomáramos muy en serio estas palabras de la doctora Dierdorf y hacer una invitación muy cordial a seguir formando parte de los proyectos de internacionalización y aprovechar todas estas herramientas disponibles que la pandemia nos ha brindado y quizá ha acelerado en este proceso de internacionalización. Y es claro, como bien nos decía la doctora Dierdorf, que la internacionalización es mucho más que movilidad, es mucho más que visitar físicamente otros países. Ella hablaba de internacionalizar todo un currículo, de ir más allá del conocimiento, de las habilidades. Y es que es claro que la internacionalización tiene más que ver con entender, con sabernos que estamos en un mismo barco. Internacionalización tiene que ver con salir al encuentro del otro, con saber que lo que pasa en el otro, aunque esté a miles de kilómetros de donde yo estoy, me afecta, me trasciende. Y tomando en cuenta esta pregunta que decían de cómo terminar con el racismo, pues el racismo se acaba justamente con la internacionalización, buscando puntos de coincidencia, buscando puntos de encuentro y encontrando en el otro, más allá de las etiquetas, del color, de de la presencia física, entendiendo que en el otro encuentro una persona y una persona que tiene muchas más coincidencias conmigo que diferencias. Y pues es claro que esta pandemia nos ha enseñado tres cosas en particular. La primera, que la internacionalización puede darse también más allá de los medios físicos. Puede darse a través del Internet, puede darse a través de herramientas como los COILs, puede darse a través de herramientas de intercambio de ideas y podemos seguir adelante. Pero también nos ha enseñado que no podemos estar solos, que necesitamos del otro para sacar adelante lo mejor de nosotros, que necesitamos del otro para mejorar nuestra persona, y también nos ha permitido esta pandemia cuestionarnos sobre la construcción de un mundo mejor. Y es claro que en la Universidad de Anáhuac, nuestro modelo formativo, pues busca tocar no solo los conocimientos, sino la mente y el corazón de nuestros alumnos para que ellos se reconozcan como ciudadanos globales. Queremos que nuestros alumnos estén más allá del conocimiento y más allá de las circunstancias. Así que bueno, pues continuemos reforzando nuestros procesos de internacionalización. Ya lo decía bien el rector al principio, la internacionalización nos presenta un cúmulo de oportunidades y claro, de retos, y nos invita a pensar en acciones concretas, en esta labor que nos trasciende como autoridades, que nos trasciende como universidad para de verdad construir un mundo más justo, más solidario. Finalmente, pues concluyo diciendo que la internacionalización es sin duda una forma de interacción de la sociedad que nos supera, que nos trasciende, que nos reta y que nos invita a cuestionarnos nuestro rol como formadores. Así que bueno, pues dicho lo anterior y siendo las 19:35 del día 2 de diciembre del 2021, pues declaro formalmente clausurada estas celebraciones del 30 aniversario de la internacionalización en la Universidad de Anáhuac. Muchas felicidades a todo el equipo y sigamos adelante con este compromiso que nos invita a pensar en una comunidad global más allá de lo que vivimos en casa. Muchas gracias y felicidades.
Muchas gracias, doctora Martínez, por estas emotivas palabras y muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. A nombre de la Dirección de Internacionalización, les agradecemos su asistencia a este evento. Muy buenas tardes a todos.